Welcome. I'm Beck Jordan, Director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Black Feminist Ethnographies in Latin America and the Caribbean. With Darlène Dubuisson, Prisca Gayles, we'll be in conversation with Barnard's Amelia, Simone, Herbert, and Maricarmen, Hernandez. Events like this one only come together with the work of many people. I want to begin by thanking the VCRW staff, Nico Wright, Pamela Phillips, Hope Dector, Sandra Moyano Ariza, and Margot Copland, as well as our brilliant research assistants, Ruben Carter, Leah Salim, Eve Thompson-Brown, and Elena Gutierrez. Thank you also to our ASL interpreters, Naomi Miller and J.R. Cruz, the Barnard Events Management Team, and our co-sponsors, the Departments of Africana Studies and of Spanish and Latin American Cultures, both at Barnard. Also a special thanks to Book Culture, who will have books available for sale at the end of the event. I know that many in our community are unable to attend with us in person tonight because of Yom Kippur, and we wish them a good holiday. We regret the conflict, and we hope you will understand that in spite of our best efforts, the challenge of working with multiple speakers, co-sponsors, and an overfull event calendar at the college means we can't always avoid conflicts. On the flip side, I've learned that it's also an auspicious night for an event because it's Vijaya Dashimi, I'm not saying it close to right, the 10th day of the holiday Navaratri, the Hindu holiday. It's 9 nights that celebrate the goddesses, and this 10th night is seen as an auspicious night for new beginnings. So it's a wonderful night for an exploration that's going to open up a lot of new understanding for many of us, and I'm grateful for that. Before we dive in, I want to quickly highlight a few upcoming PCRW events. On October 30th, we'll host an online book salon honoring Professor Kim F. Hall's new work, which we've been anticipating with such excitement, The Sweet Taste of Empire, Sugar, Mastery, and Pleasure in the Anglo-Caribbean. On November 6th, Tourmaline will give our McIntyre lecture in the event oval. And on February 27th and 28th, 2026, we invite you to join us for the Scholar and Feminist 50, our 50th anniversary conference, which will feature Judith Butler, Toshi Regan, and many more great speakers. Keep your eye out for announcements and more details about that. BCRW is dedicated to creating and sustaining spaces for intersectional feminism knowledge production. As many of you know, this kind of scholarship is under increasing attack, both in the United States and globally. As an academic research center, we are committed to the principles of academic freedom, not just freedom of speech, but the conviction that academic spaces must allow us to push the boundaries of knowledge without fear of reprisal or censorship. This means that we don't pre-approve or restrict anything that our speakers say, nor do we push them towards directions of what they must say. If we only allowed ideas we already agreed with, would never advance understanding or generate new possibilities for social change. Your support makes this work possible. So to stay connected, please scan the QR code behind me. If you want the conference updates and additional programming, you'll get that here. If you're able to contribute, donations can take you to our giving page, and every gift helps us continue presenting events like this that bring cutting-edge feminist scholarship to broad public audiences. Now I would like to acknowledge that this land you're standing on, and the land on which this campus was built, is part of Lenape, the traditional and unceded territory of the Lenape people of the Delamere Nation. The Lenape were displaced from their homelands to places as far as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, Canada. We pay respect to Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, and uplift their continuing presence on their homelands. We also acknowledge the legacy of forced displacement, enslavement, and genocide of African people from their homelands. We understand that our existence on this campus, using the resources of this institution, has been enabled by a history of both land and labor extraction. We encourage you to wear masks today when you are not speaking. We have masks in the back for those that didn't bring them. We understand masking as a disability and social justice issue, and we affirm our commitment to collective care, especially in a moment when evidence-based public health practice is under attack, being dismantled every day. Please refrain from recording or taking photos. This event is being recorded, and the video will be shared with attendees next week. During the Q&A, we ask that comments and questions be kept to 2 minutes so that we can include as many voices as possible. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome Darlène Dubuisson, the University of California, Berkeley, and Prisca Gayles, the University of Nevada, Reno, for a joint discussion of their new books, Reclaiming Haiti's Futures, Returning Intellectuals, Placemaking, and Radical Deandination, up in Rutgers University Press, and Paint in Purpose, Mobilizing Promotions to Invite the Key Black Resistance Movement from Cambridge University Press, also 20. Together, their work speaks to broader global struggles for racial justice, belonging, and social transformation, and BCRW is honored to host this conversation. Building a dialogue with partners Amelia, Simone, Herbert, and Maricarmen Hernandez, who will introduce them more slowly in just a moment. Amelia Simone Herbert is Assistant Professor of Education and Urban Studies at Rutgers College. Her research and teaching draw on anthropology, comparative education, and Black studies to interrogate the roles that education plays in the construction and subversion of urban racialized inequality. Her current book project is an ethnography that examines how youth, families, and educators navigate the racial and spatial politics of aspiration in the increasingly marketizing schooling landscape of Cape Town, South Africa. Before joining Garner, she taught at Rutgers and Colgate and spent nearly a decade as a classroom teacher in Newark. Her research has been supported by the Ford Foundation, the Fulbright Haiti Program, the American Association of University Women, and others. Maricarmen Hernandez is Assistant Professor of Sociology and Urban Studies at Barnard College, Columbia University. Her work investigates the socio-political reduction of environmental inequalities as reflected in the uneven distribution of environmental harms and privileges. Her current research project is an ethnography of contaminated, informal neighborhoods in the majority Afro-descendant city of Esmeraldas, Ecuador. She has taught at the University of New Mexico, Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales, that's at Quito, and the Universidad Luis Vargas Torres Esmeraldas. Her work has been supported by Fulbright, the National Science Foundation, the American Association of University Women, Tinker Foundation, and the American Council of Learned Societies. And now I'm delighted to turn things over to our moderators who will guide us into tonight's conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to start with saying thank you to BCRW, Beck, Margot, Nico for the support. Thank you to Prisca and Darlène for being here with us. And thanks to all of you for being here for this conversation. So Darlène Dubuisson is an assistant professor of Caribbean Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, within the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. Her research interests and teaching span political and legal anthropology, engaged and activist anthropology, Black feminist anthropology, Black intellectual histories, migration, transnational studies, and speculative fiction and visual culture. She focuses geographically on the Caribbean and Latin America. Dubuisson's recently published book, Reclaiming Haiti's Futures, Returned Intellectuals, Placemaking, and Radical Imagination, is based on ethnographic fieldwork conducted in Port-au-Prince between 2013 and 2018. Haiti was once a beacon of Black liberatory futures, but it is now often depicted as a place with no future, where emigration is the only way out for most of its population. Reclaiming Haiti's Futures tells a different story. It is a story about 2 generations of Haitian scholars who returned home after particular crises to partake in social change. The first generation, Génération 86, were intellectuals who fled Haiti during the Duvalier dictatorship. They returned after the regime fell to participate in the democratic transition through their political leadership and activism. The younger generation, dubbed the Jeunes d'Octet, returned after the 2010 earthquake to partake in national reconstruction through public higher education reform. An ethnography of the future, the book explores how these returned scholars resisted coloniality's fractures and displacements by working toward and creating inhabitability or future-oriented places of belonging through improvisation, rassemblage or assembly, and radical imagination. By focusing on Haiti and the Caribbean, the book offers insights not only into the Haitian experience, but also into how fractures have come to characterize more aspects of life globally and what we might do about it. Dubuisson is the co-author of the book Legalized Inequalities, Immigration and Race in the Low-Wage Workplace. She has published in journals such as Current Anthropology, the Annual Review of Law and Social Science, and the Journal of Latin American and Caribbean Anthropology. Dubuisson's current research examines how Black transit migrants in Mexico engage practices of love and kinwork to forward futures despite anti-Black racism and xenophobia. Welcome to Darlène Dubuisson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today and to the BCRW for organizing and hosting this event today. I'm going to introduce Prisca Gayles, an assistant professor of sociology and gender, race, and identity at the University of Nevada, Reno. She holds a PhD in Latin American studies with doctoral portfolios in African and African diaspora studies and women's gender and sexuality studies from UT Austin. Dr. Gayles investigates the role of emotions in transnational Black social movements with the broader research goal of understanding the diverse ways that Blackness is politicized across the African diaspora and used as a tool to demand racial justice in spaces of Black invisibility. Her recently published book, Pain into Purpose, Mobilizing Emotions in Argentina's Black Resistance Movement, is a groundbreaking work exploration of Argentina's Movimiento Negro, Black Resistance Movement, employing a multi-year ethnography of Black political organizing. Prisca Gayles delves deep into the challenges activists face in confronting the erasure and denial of Argentina's Black past and present. She examines how collective emotions operate at both societal and interpersonal levels in social movements, arguing that activists strategically leverage societal and racialized emotions to garner support, paying particular attention to the women activists who play a crucial role in leading and sustaining Argentina's Black organizations. The book showcases the ways Black women exercise transnational Black feminist politics to transform pain into purpose. Dr. Gayles' research and community engaged work has received funding from the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Tinker Foundation. Her research interests include Black feminist theory, Afro-Latin American feminisms, the sociology of race and ethnicity, social movements, migration and citizenship, and the African diaspora in Argentina. Her current research project, titled Beyond Borders, Between Bodies, The New Geography of Reproductive Rights in the Americas, is a multi-sided collaborative research project that examines the struggles for reproductive justice across the Americas, addressing the interconnectedness of feminist movements in the face of anti-gender agendas. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's super great to be back in New York and to be here with all of you. Give me 1 second while I plug this in. In the audience, hopefully sleeping, is my 8-month-old. Never feel. I know, it's a little worried. A little worried. Yeah, it's great to be here with you today. It's very strange to revisit a book that one has been worked on for a decade, where what's inside the book is extremely prescient. I've found that lately talking about the book is very difficult, both for what's happening in Haiti and for what's happening in the US. So I'll ask for you to bear with me. This is, for some reason, the project feels very present in ways that I did not expect. So all the title stuff I don't need to repeat. I'm sharing with you this clip. It's a source of inspiration for what we can kind of do possibly out of destruction. You'll see the cover of my book. This is a traditional Haitian artwork, and it's made out of steel drums. These drums carry oil to Haiti. These drums carry oil that forward climate change and are discarded in a place that doesn't have the facilities for discarding the material waste of other places. What artists do with these and have done is what I wanted to share just as a kind of touch point. I'm not sure why this is so loud. Give me 1 second. And the video itself I find quite silly because of the music. But I wanted to just bring you into the practice if it will allow me to fast forward. So there has been this emergence of this artwork, and you find this artwork all over Haiti. And it's something that I kind of used to kind of think with this book. So steel drums and birds. So staying with the kind of overarching sort of inspiration for the book, there's a Haitian proverb that I love. Piti piti oiseau fait nichli. Little by little, the bird builds its nest. Many Haitians use this proverb to refer to the small steps required to complete an enormous task, have patience, step by step, one day at a time, and so on. While the sentiment behind the adage is sound, I'm actually more interested in its literal translation. I imagine a bird making her nest out of fragments, progressively weaving together leaves, grass, and twigs, binding them with mud and her own saliva to create a place where she will lay her eggs and thus help ensure futures for her species. I think too about the innate instinct of birds and of other animals to return home or to a place of origin after being displaced over long distances to build nests for their offspring. Humans, I argue, and as has been argued by biologists, right, are also inclined to this homing. As biologist Bern Heinrich writes in The Homing Instinct, for animals and for us, home is a nest where we live, where our young are reared. It is also the surrounding territory that supports us. Homing is migrating to and identifying a suitable area for living and reproducing and making it fit our needs, and the orienting and the ability to return to our own good place if we are displaced from it. So the book then is about returning home, right? And what I say is that for post-colonial Caribbean migrants displaced by political violence, economic disparity and ecological disaster, leaving their home countries for former metropoles or present-day settler colonies and neocolonial empires is often seen as the best way to secure a future for themselves and their families. Returning home is often seen to unsuitable conditions is rarely a choice, and voluntary permanent returns are usually only rendered conceivable when another future seems possible. This book is about the future that opens up in the aftermath of crises. It suggests that at the point where the world is ending comes a possibility for worlds to begin, and people at this point of fracturing mobilize. So then that's the metaphor I use for the book, Fractures and Sutures. To quote artist, anthropologist, activist Gina Athena Usilis, echoing Rachel Beauvoir-Dominique, we are living in times of deepest fracture and with fracture. Fractures conjure the images of breaking, the breaking of bones, of earth, of peoples, societies, spirits, and psyches. Sudden bodily trauma, disease, overuse may cause bones to break, resulting in displaced, non-displaced, simple or compound fractures. Unnatural disasters like the earthquake, the one in Haiti, may bring into sharp relief the fault zones of our societies. So fractures, then, are a site of breaking. I also talk about the ways in which fractures may also reveal something else. They're also a site of suturing or occasions for repair or reassembly. So in medicine, sutures are vital for closing wounds, joining bones, promoting healing. A metaphor that I use a lot of metaphors in this mobilization of fractures and sutures. I talk about this kind of flower that grows between the cracks and what fractures do. It shows the fault lines in our societies. It shows how whatever it is that cause the kind of crises need to be dealt with, right? And that I'm using the earthquake, I use the dictatorship as these metaphors of these extreme crises that forces us to confront reality as it is. Fractures break open our illusions. The problem is, though, we sometimes we sometimes fail to act in these moments before that kind of window of change closes up. This is the context of, for the next 5 minutes, this is the context of the book. That is the framing. So the book then is about intellectuals and scholars who return home after two sets of crises, one authoritarian rule and the other one a natural disaster, with the image of bringing about a new Haiti. And what I wanted to say is that this impetus for change, intellectuals and artists coming to fight for change in this way, is part and deeply rooted in Haitian society. What you see here is a revolution that happened this image here is a revolution that happened in 1934 against dictatorship. No, sorry, not dictatorship, occupation, right? I do that slippage a lot. The U.S. occupation of Haiti. And it was students at the local university when the United States, one of the first things it did when it took over Haiti, it redirected its education system by first creating a school of agriculture and the other one a military school. And they would bring in someone named Friedman from Harvard, who the criteria was that Friedman he was a businessman, he knew nothing about education. He also had to be not racist, but he had to be white. And he cut his teeth in the business world with the cotton industry in Texas. So he came and restructured the education in Haiti. And one of the first things he did was cut scholarships. So the students rallied the students were med school students and other schools, the law school. They would go to the paysans, the peasantry and workers, and saying basically this fight is also your fight. We all must fight against the U.S. occupation. And this would lead to one of the largest demonstrations that would halt the U.S. occupation that had been there for 20 years. So you have in the streets students, workers, and it was called the Damien Revolt. So that's one precedent. Here you have then in 1946 a group of students, these are Haitian students, and they're becoming radicalized, if you will, and this kind of post-World War II movement with ideas of Marxism and, coming together across class and color. And they would create a journal called La Roche. La Roche would say and call the call on and call to task the Haitian government at the time, which they said was in line with fascist Italy. And one of the things they did is that they would go into the marketplaces, read the journals out loud for those who couldn't read in French. They mobilized folks. They were part of larger mobilizations. And here's the larger group of them. And that would lead to this. I'm obviously giving you the shortcut, right? So this would help end years of Milat, political rule, and would usher in a period of Black political rule, which would be problematic in different ways. But this was called the Revolution of 1946. A figure that's part of this somehow in the background is Duvalier. Duvalier was also being formed around this time, 1930s, 1940s, and he was one of those young revolutionaries, right? He was educated at the School of Medicine. He also got a scholarship. Haiti had scholarships and sent people to different places. He would go to Michigan, actually. Duvalier would become president in 1957, and he knew something very well, being a young dissident himself, that the way to forward authoritarian rule was control of the university. That had to be what he did. And what he would do, and Duvalier was also part of the Red Scare movement. The United States supported the Duvalier regime because they were seen as their best ally against Cuba. That is an important context. The same way they did recently with the last two presidents of Haiti, the United States would back and say that this is the president, right, who was elected. So Duvalier, what they call him Papa Doc Duvalier, would set up one of the most bloodiest regimes. And in one of the first things he did, he closed down the university in 1960, 1961. He restructured it from the University of Haiti and called it the State University of Haiti. The president would elect those who would become the president, and freedom of assembly was abolished. So people could not meet in larger groups. There was no protest. A police state was established. The Tonton Macoutes, who were not the actual police, they were paramilitary. They disappeared intellectuals. They disappeared students. And certain words were omitted. You couldn't say anything around labor, workers' rights, etc. And so that would cause massive exiles of intellectuals, and that is where my story begins. In what you see here is a group of young folks who decided to take Duvalier on. They were in New York City. They are known as Jeunes Haïti, Haitian youth, or Young Haiti. They would come to Haiti and I'm giving you a very long and the short of it, they would come to fight in a guerrilla warfare, if you will. But they were also poets and thinkers. And what Duvalier did, and this is why I want to underscore this, I could have given this talk many, many different ways. But there is a sense in Haiti of the kind of normalcy of all of this, and then what could be allowed. Well, one of the first things he did was, and a lot of my interlocutors, where they enter the story, is one of my interlocutors in the second chapter. She talks about her as a young girl being pulled out of school because the schools were brought to witness this. This is the execution of Marcel. These are execution of two that they caught of the Jenaitsi, two of the 13, Durand and Numa. And I sat across from her in her office as she talked about this moment. This being the moment she says that she understood that they entered absolute dictatorship. So this is kind of where my story enters here at this moment, this kind of 1964 moment, where my first interlocutors of the older generation, Génération 86, this is when they are first going into exile. For the first time, really. And she's recalling this person that I call in my book Claire. She's recalling the moment when she's an 8-year-old girl, and this is how they're sensitized into what dissent is and what intellectualism is. She would return in 1986 when Duvalier fell. But really, it was what was interesting then is this call in 1964. This is a Haitian intellectual who's living overseas. And he says this, thinking about the history that I just shared. Will the intellectual once more? So I want to say that intellectuals worked on both sides of the fractures and the sutures, right? Both at division and also at suturing. But he says, will the intellectual once more take up the task to teach union instead of class hatred, tolerance instead of persecution, some measure of freedom against dictatorship, and the priority of the masses' needs over personal ambition? What the slide I skipped over quickly is this is the kind of post-Duvalier moment, right? And so I'm looking at Génération 86 who return when I say to take up this task of suturing. The book is about all the contradictions, all the challenges, and all the possibilities of seizing this moment of crisis to imagine and bring forth different futures. So, like we shared before, it is a multivocal, multi-voice. So I look at both generations and multi-sided throughout Port-au-Prince. So it argues that extent fractures in Haiti and the Caribbean, what I call the consequences of coloniality, and we can talk about this more, and its myriad manifestations, contributed to the displacements of Génération 86 and the Jeunes Docteurs, and simultaneous crises in the public university system. These returned scholars nonetheless worked towards and created inhabitability or future-oriented places of belonging within and beyond Haitian academe through improvisation, rassemblage, and radical imagination. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the BCRW for having us, and to Amelia and Nico and Margot and Maricarmen for all the work you did to bring us here and make it so seamless. So thank you so much. What I'm going to start with is just a short reading from the third chapter in my book. It's about an encounter that I had in which a member of the Black movement in Argentina is talking to an official of what's called the Ministerio del Pueblo, or the Ombudsman Office, about the importance of creating this Ministry of Black, or creating an Institute of Black Culture. And it was a film series, the way they organized it. So in August of 2015, I attended 4 of 6 sessions of a weekly film series titled Visibilizando lo Negado, Voces y Imágenes Actuales, or Visibilizing the Denied, Current Voices and Images. It was hosted by the Centro Cultural Floreal Gorini, which is a cultural center located in Corrientes, a major avenue in Buenos Aires City. It is situated in the middle of the block on a major stretch of the theater district in an area that is heavily populated with foot traffic. Aside from the various meeting rooms, lecture rooms, and an amphitheater to host various intellectual and popular discussions and plays, the building also includes a gift shop, a library, and exposition rooms for fine arts culture. And I say that because it's important, because this building functions, it's a cultural space, but an open and public space, kind of like a museum, but also a theater. The high-ceiling lobby includes murals of famous Argentine painters, and the location has hosted the meetings of various diplomats and foreign presidents. The space is thus one that attracts a variety of visitors, from those ranging who seek to enjoy the events and the lore of the theater district to low or no cost,
to students who use the library for research, academics who use the space for conferences or special events, and very importantly, civil society organizations who reserve the rooms to host their events. The film series that I attended was hosted by the Grupo de Estudios Afro-Latinoamericanos at the University of Buenos Aires and the Afro-Latin American Studies group, but co-sponsored by 3 Black activist organizations in Argentina. And so on the opening night, it was a really big, the attendance was very big on this open night, about 200 or so in a theater that sat 300. And these people, the attendees, ranged from people who were curious about the films and walked in when they saw the poster displayed, because the films were about Black Argentines, various documentaries. It included also academics, activists, and representatives of state institutions. Some of the attendees were Afro-Argentines who I later learned were part of social networks of various other networks, but were not actively involved in the movement. I also learned that one of the invited panel members was a quote-unquote important officer from the Ombudsman office. And so with that scene in mind, an older woman gets up to speak, to introduce the first series of the films. Her name is Maria, and she's an activist and a 6th-generation descendant of Afro-Argentines who were brought as enslaved Africans. And that's how she describes her family. She commented on the importance of the series and that there was such a diverse crowd there to see the series. And she said, "It is really important that you were here because this is a step toward us seeking justice for the first disappeared." She paused as she noticed, I assume as she noticed, but you could notice uncomfortable shifts and changes in the room. She paused and stated emphatically, "Nosotros somos los primeros desaparecidos, eh? We are the first disappeared." For Argentines and anyone familiar with the history of human rights abuses in Argentina, the term desaparecidos is loaded with strong emotions of societal haunting, angst, empathy, ambivalence, and indignation, among others. So Maria's reference to being the primeros desaparecidos in this context was not only intended to mobilize potential Afro-Argentine movement participants, but also a powerful state to mobilize powerful state functionaries who are often present at these events. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to start today's talk with that movement is because with that little excerpt from the book is because that was a moment in which I realized something very strategic was happening with how Black activists in Argentina were drawing upon past movements, which is, very common in social movements that you look at how people draw on past movements. But it was very specifically tied to the emotional histories of the human rights movement. And so that's something I saw throughout the movement. That kind of really kind of brought the other places of my research that all had to do with emotions, but together to see how it was stating Black folks in Argentina, although the movement is very diverse, it's not only Afro-Argentines, but bringing them together as having a right to exist in Argentina with respect and with dignity. And so one of the kind of main mantra in the movement is Argentina is also Afro-descendant, or Afro-Argentina is Black too. And so this picture here this was taken in 2010 at the bicentennial. I first arrived to Argentina in 2012, and I was working on a museum exhibit with a historiographer out of the University of La Plata. And we put together an exhibit called The African Roots of the Tango, in which we looked through archives and we found some of the original tango writers and a lot of songs that kind of tried to trace the African components of the music. In terms of, we had an ethnomusicologist we were working with. And then when I attended that show, and when I attended some of the exhibits, that's where I first began to meet some of the Black activists who participated in the movement. And so one of the things that one of the 3 persons said to me when we were presenting this and I was telling them about this history, and he said, "Well, you don't have to tell me about this. I know this history. I'm a militante afro. I'm a Black activist." He said, and he's like, "This is my history." And he's like, "It would be really nice because we have so many white scholars working on us. It would be really nice if you did this work with us." So not to mention about the scholars I was working with at the University of La Plata were all white Argentines. And so I returned to do an internship where I was working with Agrupación Changó, a Black empowerment movement. And that's where kind of my research really started. And so one of the things that came out of it is, our stories, our histories, our words. And so one of the things that I do in this book For the rest of the time I have, I'll kind of try to take you quickly through the chapters so you can get a sense of what it is. But I always start each chapter with their words, not only words that came up or phrases that came up as very salient or important in analyzing the data of my fieldwork, but also words and concepts that were important to them that they stated in our conversations. And so through that, I kind of want to tell you about kind of 4 of the big frames that came out of that. And so the first one is this concept of refuting what I name is foreignization in the book. I borrow that term from an Afro-Argentine scholar who talks about foreignization as this concept where to be Black and Argentine are two things that don't exist together for most white Argentines. And many Afro-Argentines, but also Afro-descendants, express this through this experience of being asked, where are they from? And so de donde sos, where are you from? And so in this chapter, I include a story of a woman who is also 6th generation Afro-Argentine, and she talks about meeting this man, and he said like, wow, you sound like you're Argentine, and where are you from? And she says, I am Argentine. And there's this, well, where are your parents from? Where are your parents from? Where are their parents from? And she asked him, where's your grandparent from? And he says, my grandfather is from Italy. And she says, well, you are more of an import than I am. My great-great-grandparents were here on this land. And so in this chapter, I kind of document moments of racialization that tie into this foreignization. And some of the examples I have here, so this is, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more when I talk about chapter 3, but the National School of Art did a session on learning how to do makeup for the movies. And how to be Black. And so it was very much caricatured versions of what Blackness looks like, but also drawing from the American context. So when the Black movement, which includes Afro-Argentines, Afro-descendants from all over Latin America, Afro-descendants from Europe, it includes Haitian activists who they say we're not Afro-descendants, we're Black, and I love that. And so they did this, this really big protest called Nescrache, but it was because of this. And on the other side, I was just documenting the everyday experiences. That chapter more so kind of is more about the conversations I had with Afro-descendants and Black people in Argentina. But I was just really trying to show the everydayness of it. And so this is a pastry, it's all the way from the left, that you will commonly find in many bakeries in Argentina. You see 3 names. This one says Camarón, which means Cameroonian. You might see Africanitos, or little Africans, or you might see Negritas, little Black women, and they'll have like a little chocolate icing that looks like an afro on it. And so this is another thing that the movement has shown up to protest, these caricatured figures. And the whole point of really contesting that notion of de donde sos is to refute this myth of Argentina as a white nation. And so here I have 2 examples from presidents. And you should know that these are considered like right-leaning presidents, but even those who are considered left-leaning presidents have said things like, in Argentina, we all descend from the European ships, right? Carlos Menem in 1996 said, Black people don't exist in Argentina. That's a problem that Brazil has, right? Macri in 2018 said, I think he's trying to convince, he's at the World Forum in Davos and wants to talk about a really fruitful trade union that could happen between the European Union and the South American Mercosur. And he says, oh, we are all European since there as well, so it'll be a great trade, right? And so that denial of Blackness in Argentina is what many activists are fighting against. I also, in telling the history of how the movement emerged, I really wanted to pay homage to the really powerful activists who created civil society organizations shortly after the military dictatorship, where it was very fearful for people to create civil society organizations and create explicitly Black organizations. So Pocha La Madrid, Carmen Sala Platero. I talk about Miriam Gomez, who still today is like kind of the auntie of the movement. Lucia Domingo, and then Enrique Nadal, who was actually a victim of the disappeared, and then he was actually released after his torture and then exiled, and then came back to Argentina to found the first Pan-African organization there. It was the Latin American Association Against Apartheid in Argentina. And so that's what that book does, and that phrase of poner el cuerpo is a phrase that I hear all the time when Black women are saying, we have to show up to this space and this space and this space, and we have to be in all the spaces because in all those spaces we experience oppression. And so that term poner el cuerpo really came up a lot when they were talking about the exhaustion of participating simultaneously in the Black movement and the feminist movement, and combating racism on the one hand or sexism on the other. And the third chapter is really where I get into talking about the collective emotions. And so that draws on that phrase I mentioned, that nosotros somos los primeros desaparecidos. And so they draw upon that. And even today, they use the word disappear to talk about state-sanctioned extrajudicial kidnapping and murdering. So this was a Uruguayan activist who had been active in Argentina for about 10 or 12 years at this time, who intervened when he saw a case of police brutality against some Afro-Brazilian tourist, and then was arrested and detained, and then never showed up alive again. And this actually went up all the way to the International Criminal Court. And when they examined his body, they found out he was tortured and beaten to death. And so although the International Court condemned Argentina, and Argentina took or kind of recognized the wrongdoing in that case, that was as of 2020, today the perpetrators have never been arrested, even though everyone knows who they are. And then this is another example of how they draw upon the human rights movement. So this is like blackface is very, very rampant in Argentina. And so one of the things that activists do there is they do what's called an escrache. It's a practice, an activist practice that emerged out of the human rights movement. And so after these like multiple experiences of blackface, so what they did with the university, and I'll just use that example, is they showed up en masse and protested outside of the university so students could not enter into their class unless they heard about what was happening. And that included teaching them about the history of blackface in Argentina, but then even connecting it with histories of blackface in the US and how it's degrading. And so the figure you see in the middle is a very caricatured figure. And it's the one time you'll see people in Argentina acknowledging the possibility of a Black Afro-Argentine woman, but it harkens back to the colonial period, to women who sold empanadas. So that figure in the middle is the representation of the vendedora de empanadas, which is interesting because it's made in such a caricatured way. But the historical research shows that vendedoras de empanadas, or women who were street sellers, were more likely to purchase their family's freedom during slavery in Argentina than any other group. And so that's how, as entrepreneurial women, that is how they bought the freedom of their families. And in the penultimate chapter, I talk about, and this is where I really just talk about how Black women are drawing upon transnational Black feminist frameworks. And this is something that I saw when I was there, when we would have kind of book reading clubs. That was like a really big kind of way to bring the Black women together in community, but also to like unpack their experiences that they were having with gendered racism. And so I do this more, I kind of show it through the visual rhetorics of their participation in feminist movements, because a lot of times they were experiencing, and I don't have time to go into the detail, but experiencing really, really racist acts while participating in so-called very progressive feminist movements. The Argentine feminist movement is one of the most well-known and recognized around the world. And so they march with, so one of the things that they were explicit about is marching with the turban, or with the African head wrap, but then also carrying signs that had the slogans, words, or like you might even see like the title of Lelia Gonzalez is for an Afro-American feminism. Feminism is a feminism that is not racist. A feminism that is not anti-racist. It's racist. We need to decolonize feminism. That's Yuderquis Espinosa. For an anti-racist feminism, the one on the right is Angela Davis. Feminism will be anti-racist or it won't be. And so, and you will see the slogans and phrases of Audre Lorde, Beatriz Nascimento, Chimamanda Adichie. You'll see a lot of different either slogans or concepts from their writings. And that's one of the ways they were using, kind of the ways that they were learning to understand what was happening to them in their personal lives and to make it public facing in their activism. And so in the last, this is another picture of that as well, of them marching with a picture of Marielle Franco and the feminist protest as well, just making Black women and Black women's experiences visible. And then I wrap up with talking about their work during the pandemic. It was at the height, a lot of this stuff is coming out at the height of the protest around the world in protest of George Floyd's murder. And so you see them also talking about how police brutality also exists in Argentina. Or this one is a call to action, and it's for George for Protest, and it says Black Lives Matter in Argentina as well. But then bringing in stories. So this is a story of Moises, and there was another, Amadou and Moises were two Senegalese immigrants in Argentina who in 2018 and 2019 were killed by the police. And so they're using the kind of that drawing like on that transnational Black movement to make their movement more visible. And so I will stop there. And that is my thank you to everyone for participating. I look forward to our Herbert. So.
So thank you both. We're excited to have a conversation around some questions and kind of themes that we pulled together from your books. And since we have about 10 minutes, I think what we'll do for the first one is kind of tack on two questions. I'm going to ask something and then Maricarmen together, and we'll kind of have you all respond and then see if we have time before the Q&A for another. So we understand that you all work from, different traditions of anthropology and sociology, but one of the things that we wanted to bring you together around is your work as ethnographers and the fact that you are sort of working in your books deeply with Black feminist scholarship and approaches to ethnography. And so we want to understand more, what does Black feminist ethnography mean to you, especially, across these two fields, and how does that inform your work? And then we have something a little bit more key around the concepts to kind of share that I think goes with that.
Okay, yeah. Our second question that we had prepared. Pain into Purpose and Reclaiming Haiti's Futures both mobilize core concepts drawn from transnational Black feminist scholarship to illustrate how traditions of Black thought and praxis are passed on in spaces like protests, reading groups, salons, poetries, open mics, and other gatherings. Prisca engages with Afro-Brazilian philosopher Vilma Piedad's concept of dororidade, a combination of the Portuguese words for pain, solidarity, and sisterhood, to illuminate why and how effective processes of mobilizing emotions are critical to Black women's participation in Argentina's feminist and Black social movements. Darlène draws on Haitian American artist and scholar Gina Athena Ulysses' concept of rassemblage, a Creole word for a decolonial praxis of assembly, compilation, enlisting, and regrouping of ideas, things, people, and spirits that resists the fractures of coloniality and brings liberatory features into the present. How did your engagements with these scholars shape your ethnographic research on the ground and inform the key interventions of each of your books?
Thank you for those questions, and thank you also for reading our books. It means a lot. I'm gonna cry. So first is thinking about like Black feminist ethnography, what it means to me. I think I'll start with a story, a really quick one, if I can. So a number of my siblings are academics, but in very different disciplines, and so we often are like sharing our work. And so one time it was after a Black Studies theory class that I was taking that Pablo is in. Where you at, Pablo? Shout out. But I was telling them about a book that we had read, and I won't name the author out of respect for folks' work. But I was telling them about a book that we had read in that course. And it was a scholar who had done an ethnography of a Black community. It wasn't a Black scholar, but they had done an ethnography of a community. And I was telling them about the main findings of the book, just kind of because they were like, what do sociologists do, or what do ethnographers do? And I told them kind of that main finding, and my older sister was like, duh. And then and mother was like, yeah, like, so like the duh, like we know that. And for me, I think it was this moment where like Patricia Hill Collins' argument that, Black women know best how to theorize their own social worlds. It was for me like we don't have to go to a place. So for me, this is what Black feminist ethnography is, especially if I'm working with Black people, Black women, that I don't need to go to try to understand what's going on. I need to go there, and so they can help me understand what's going on. And that's what it means for me. The people I worked with are brilliant, and they can tell you about theorizing racism in Argentina, which for me, I didn't know what to do. Like I was constantly in therapy because it was an experience, a way that I had not experienced racism before. And they told me, this is why this particular thing happens to you, and this is why this particular thing happened. And so I think it's really about that, taking Black women serious as the theorist of their own social worlds. That's what it means for me.
Let's see. Maybe there's a delay. Do you hear it? So, and what I decided to share with you is just the historical background and not really the ethnography. But you might have heard a little bit of what the ethnography was, which is dialogue. So, how do you do Black feminist ethnography when you're not dealing or your main interlocutors are not Black feminists? That is my dilemma, right? I'm doing ethnographies with men and women, some of whom might be the very opposite of feminists, maybe very critical of Black feminism or Haitian feminism, some of whom would forward the feminist movement. But what I'm doing is I'm doing an ethnography with intellectuals that come from many different schools and generations of thought. So for me, what is a Black feminist ethnography? It is what you're saying as well, is taking my interlocutors serious, not only as intellectuals, but as sometimes I think when we talk about in ethnography that the folks with whom we work, they are theorists themselves. It's something that's very old, let's say in anthropology, right? We know this, and in the authority of it looks very different, meaning there's a single author on a book that took many, many, many voices, right? So for me, I had to go a step further. It meant that not only am I engaging with folks through dialogue, and I was teaching at the State University of Haiti, it's not only being embodied there as a scholar, as a colleague, as a friend, it meant that I am going to cite them. I am going to theorize with them, and my book needs to simultaneously be an intellectual history where they are cited throughout. So that I make a point of. The bibliography is long, longer than any chapter, and it cites text in Creole, in French by my interlocutors. It takes them as the theorists, taking their theories, not only what they said, but what they've written, how they've written it, and using their words and their insights as intellectuals, but more than that, as scholars who deserve my citational practices more than Foucault.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that because when we were talking about the kind of the concepts that we use, how they show up. And so one of the concepts that I use in chapter one is that extranjerización or foreignization. And that is a concept that a Argentine scholar has written about. And so like bringing that really kind of how I see them show up. And so one of the things is that like, as I had been working on my notes, that word foreignization had been all over it, right? Um, but I didn't know that concept yet, and so I think one of the ways it showed up is in hearing even from students talk about their experiences in schools, to Black women talk about their experience of gendered racism, to hearing Black men talk about their experience. There was two Afro-Argentine men who were became part of the Ministry of Culture, and that actually came out of that whole conversation that I first told you about that I started with, but their experiences, and as I'm like going through the interviews and I'm like, this is foreignization. This is what Medium Gomez is talking about in her chapter on Afro-descent experiences in Argentina. So that comes very much a part of it. The Doridaji part really came through. So a lot of the work that I did with activists in Argentina, I attended all of the meetings of the Comisión Ochone, which was the umbrella organization of the social movement. But I did a lot of work with the Área de Género, which is the gender section of the movement. And that's how I simultaneously became involved in the neo feminist movement. But a lot of the actions of like what they decided to do started with like a Black woman sharing something that happened that was very painful, right? And so a lot of like some of the actions that we took. So even with that makeup school, there's a Black Austrian woman who had come to Argentina to study theater, and she was at that National University of the Art School. And so these were her peers. She's not in those pictures. She basically said something to them and they kind of laughed it off. She ended up dropping out of that school, but her sharing that and it's like, this is what they're posting on the Facebook page of the National University of Arts right now. And I said how it's problematic, and they kind of laughed at me and pushed me off. And even the professor told me I was being a problem in that class. And so like so many of the actions that we took that were, whether it was a protest, an escrache, how even the decision to march as a single block within the feminist march came out of Black women's experiences of pain and finding solidarity through other Black women who had had a similar experience or could understand or could empathize. And that for me was kind of seeing Dori Daji in action. And so that's kind of where I used that, how Vilma Piedade was theorizing that to talk about Black women's activism specifically.
So in thinking about sort of Black feminist ethnography, Darlene, in your book, you engage with the work of pioneering Black ethnographers Zora Neale Hurston to reflect on the complexities of straddling insider and outsider lenses in ethnographic research. And you discuss Hurston's pathbreaking research in her all-Black hometown of Eatonville, Florida, and her contributions to a long tradition of Black feminist ethnography that has sought to decolonize anthropology through in your case, through self-reflexive and engaged methodologies. Yet you also grapple with the contradictions and missteps of Hurston's assumed insider status in her work as an ethnographer in the Caribbean and specifically in Haiti. And you describe how Hurston's work as an ethnographer taught you to be careful of claims of insider knowledge, even in your ethnic homeland, and to continually interrogate how your U.S. citizenship and scholarly training in the U.S. informed how you viewed and experienced the field and related to interlocutors. And you state, familiarity could not be my driving force, nor could strangeness. And Prisca, you reflect on the complexities of doing research in the Movimiento Negro in Argentina and how your positionality as a Black American woman and academic shaped your experiences in the field. And so for the both of you, we would love to hear more about how your embodied experiences as Black women and your status as U.S. citizens shaped your ethnographic engagements on the ground, how you straddled insider-outsider perspectives, and how you contended with the privilege afforded by the very thing that we often critique in our work, U.S. empire.
So I'll start. As some of you might have seen, I ran out a little bit to go nurse a little boy. I have an 11-year-old who was with me during field work in Haiti, and he then was just turned 3. That was more of an affordance than anything else. I'm not sure how, but it was. And then I was, parenting him by myself and working at the university. So it meant what I called before creating a kind of laku, this kind of like makeshift community that included a bunch of different people. So that made me, it's kind of like, I didn't want to live with my aunt who didn't live too far away. I knew if I was going to do this and really grapple with what it means to be an insider outsider, I couldn't hide behind my aunt. And the fact that she would keep me from making certain mistakes, right? So I had to go it alone. So that was one thing, being on my own and being a caregiver and having to show up as a responsible person by myself and navigating things like where do I get drinkable water, etc. But I want to go back to Hurston real quick. So there is a thing I think you've probably seen of the resurrection of Zora Neale Hurston when the Academy had definitely rejected her up until Alice Walker and maybe Oprah said that she was important. I just want to, just because of where we are, that's important. Zora Neale Hurston writes, "How it feels to be colored me. If you've not read it and you're a student or professor at Barnard, read it." Because what she talks about is her insider-outsider status, both in the academy, and she talks about it at home. What Zora Neale Hurston does, though, which is important when she goes back to Eatonville, which I don't think folks know, is that she reinitiated herself into the community by seeing what they call there like a hoodoo doctor. That sounds silly, but it's not. Like, she went through a ritualizing to get back into Eatonville, to be seen as local again. And she writes about that kind of needing for initiation. In Haiti, there was this impulse almost to say, I know you look familiar. But if you read those chapters in Telling My Horse, And if you're from Haiti or Jamaica, you're realizing that something else is going on here that's very unsettling. And part of it is the question is what afforded Zora Neale Hurston to be there was the U.S. occupation of Haiti, and it's mentioned in the positive in her book, and that's also what opened up U.S. anthropology to Haiti was the U.S. occupation. So the first kind of slides I showed you, the first of the rebellions that I showed you, the Damien Revolt, on the other side is this kind of this this real interest in American anthropology in Haiti and taking and not quoting the findings from intellectuals like Jean Price Mars. And you would give birth to Herskovits and others. But there were also local ethnologists in Haiti that would build a local ethnology, but it was the U.S. Academy that benefited from that moment. And so that's something I want us to think about, how empire enabled Zora Neale Hurston's research, and that's not really disclosed.
Is it back? Yes, it's back. So it's coming into this research, I came into it from a study abroad perspective. And I think, at this time I'd already been reading like research about insider outsider status. But aside from being Black, I never really considered myself an insider. I mean, it's a different culture. It's a whole different context. And also I'm always leaving that community every summer, or even when I was there for my 1.5 years, I was going to be leaving. So I never considered myself an insider in that way. But I do think in terms of the outsider that, and especially that U.S. empire relationship to U.S. empire really comes in ways that are simultaneously protecting you, but making you feel really uncomfortable. And so that was what I tried to grapple with. And I think at the same time, it was important because it constantly kept me remembering that you are not an insider here. You were invited in, and it was because they were like, finally, a Black person doing research on Afro-Argentines. It was like when I started there, it was like Medium, who's Afro-Argentine, but then it was Ani Okoro, who's Colombian, and myself. And now there's more folks doing that. But like when I was there at that time, that's kind of the 3 Black scholars who was doing it. And then at different times, there's a couple of other U.S. Black scholars, Judy Anderson, Erica Edwards, doing that work. So there's some invitation of like, we think Black people should study Black people, and they are sick of white Argentines doing that work. But in terms of like the other side, like the protected, like it was always like, so I think that there's sometimes the danger of slipping into thinking I know what it's like to live in Argentina and be Black. And so like, I'll give one of the examples is I would often travel on the buses to go up to like different provinces to interview, because the Black Movement Organization is centralized in Buenos Aires, but they're in Misiones and Rio Negro, so up and down Argentina. And that 25-30 hour bus ride was what I could use to like analyze field notes and things like that. And so I would take the bus up, and without a single difference, every single time I rode those buses, the Gendarmeria, which is like Border Patrol, would come onto the bus, and they would always come to me, and I knew what's happening. They would say, "Can I see your ID? What are you doing here? How did you get to the country?" I would show them ID. And over time, I thought, this is what it's like to be Black in Argentina. You can't even ride a bus through the country without them. Like, they would get on the bus, and they would question me, and they would also question people who, quote unquote, looked indigenous, right? And so once I actually was riding to the National Women's Conference with other Black women. And so on the way back, there were 5 of us who took the same bus. 2 were Afro-Argentine. There was an Afro-Colombian, Afro-Cuban woman. The Afro-Cuban woman was naturalized. She had lived there for 12, 13 years. She had her citizenship. And so they were looking at her. They asked her all these questions. How long have you been here? Where do you work? Double checking. So that was one experience as an Afro-Cuban person. Same thing with the Afro-Colombian woman. The 2 Afro-Argentine women, they probably took the most time on. Where were you born? Where were your parents born? And then at one point, one of the officers, she took their IDs, and she put it up to the window to try to check to see if it was fake, their national ID. And it's interesting because even at that, witnessing the officers go to them first, I still thought I knew what it was like to be Black on a long distance bus in Argentina. And they get to me, and she's asked for my ID, so I give her my passport, and she says, "Disculpa la molestia, señora." Like, "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am." And then the Colombian said, "Don't forget to ask her to bring you an iPhone the next time," kind of recognizing that relationship of empire, right? And so
even though like I was not harassed nearly to the level they were, right? I got an apology, kind of, right? And so it was often that kind of place of that it offered me protection that Black people don't experience in Argentina. And so at the same time, it was very uncomfortable. I think it was really important for me to have those moments as a reminder, and also like why the work that I do and the work that they do is so important.